Hello, everyone, and welcome back to this week's Rose and Rubini podcast, Making Sense of This World. Uh, my name is Manas Chawla, and as always, I'm really pleased to be joined by CEO and Head of Research, Brunello Rosa. This week, we're talking about resilience amid divergence, perhaps the key theme and the key takeaways from the IMF spring meetings, which, Brunello, you attended in person in Washington, D.C. Always a melting pot of the world's sort of finest central bankers, economists, and people sort of in the trade. But this was happening at a particularly interesting time, obviously, given the geopolitical backdrop, given the interestingly evolving macroeconomic backdrop. What were some of these key takeaways? Perhaps can we start with the sort of, hot geopolitical front?
Yeah, so clearly when we were there, lots of things happened from a geopolitical standpoint. It was this exchange between Israel and Iran for the first time in history, in fact. Before that, there'd always been sort of proxy attacks, road in embassies and so on. Instead, we were there. The good thing about that is that there was the impression that both sides didn't want to escalate too much. So there was attack, counterattack, another counterattack, but always in a way that the other part realized that they shouldn't escalate too much. And if we are lucky enough, that is not going to happen in coming months. Second point, of course, when I was there, the $95 billion package of aid to Ukraine, 61 billion plus Taiwan and Israel, was finally approved by the US House of Representatives and subsequently the Senate. That was absolutely key to allow the Ukrainians to finally at least resist the Russians, which in this phase of the war are in fact at the peak of their offensive. And then on the other geopolitical front, Venezuela was high in the agenda because the US started to impose sanctions on the country, considering that those free and fair elections that are promised by Maduro may occur, but may not as free and fair as promised. But again, the sanctions still leave space for foreign companies to sign contracts with the country, allow Venezuela to export its oil and so on and so forth. So, again, it's a process that I think will restart after the elections in a few months.
Yeah. And then looking towards the macroeconomic front, I mean, there's clear questions here of, what the world economic outlook and its forecast says, but also on inflation, which is the key concern for policymakers around the world. What did the meetings tell you about these two key issues?
So on the macroeconomic front, the key is that the IMF says this growth is steady but slow. In fact, economic growth at global level it remains at 3.2%, a level that for many years has been considered akin to effectively a global recession, considering that given population growth and growth of some emerging markets, in particular in Africa, you know, global growth tend to remain in the positive territory. But what we consider good robust global growth is around 4.5, 5%. So 3.2, yes, it's positive, but it's way too slow. Plus, there are divergences within it. The US is doing particularly well, with economy accelerating to 2.7% growth, even faster than the previous year. Also, the euro area is seen accelerating, but from a much, much lower level, from 0.4 to 0.8. And let's not forget that a number of European countries have actually experienced um, a, um, technical recession at the end of last year. Instead, there are some economies, such as China, who are seen as decelerating from 5.24 to 4.6. And India as well is seen decelerating together with Brazil and other large emerging markets such as Russia and Mexico. So Clearly there's steady but slow and divergent. These were the key macroeconomic things. On the inflation front, um, inflation is down on compared to previous year on a global level, but again, there are risks. This downward trend is bumpy, and there might be episodes of re-increasing inflation due to higher energy prices that have an effect on headline inflation. Will central banks be able to look through them? This is the big question that will need to be answered in coming months.
Yeah. Seems like, some monetary easing is on the way, but probably much lesser than expected, only, a few weeks to a few months ago. But given all of this, markets might find some reason not to be too scared, despite the sort of volatile, especially geopolitical, if not macroeconomic climate. So as always, Bruno, thank you so much for your time and insight.
Thank you. Until next time.